In the blazing fire of the forge, Roman poured all his strength into each strike, as if pouring his heart and soul into the glowing steel. Each clang echoed a step forward in the rebirth journey he chose for himself. His bare back drenched in sweat, determined eyes, and the light rising from the furnace, Roman tirelessly hammered down, forging his sword. No longer a useless rich kid, he was now the one writing his own destiny. Amid the red-hot glow, hammer and steel clashed rhythmically. Roman forged the blade not only with muscle power, but with consistency, discipline, and a rhythm like the breath of a warrior. Roman's eyes flashed in the ember light. Once his goal was set, he sank deep into absolute focus. Nothing existed beyond the sword and the ideal he pursued. Each powerful strike fell with the full weight of his will. It was not merely forging steel, but Roman's way of proving determination, shedding the past, and forging a new self. In the fire's reflected light, Roman's eyes shone with a question piercing his being. What do I live for? At that moment, he was not just forging a sword, he was seeking the meaning of life. Memories surged back like an indelible shadow, a father known as the demon god, who thrust Roman into a brutal survival game. But from that harsh place, he rose to the peak of strength. Roman bore no resentment toward the past. To him, it was the undeniable truth of life, and now he applied that to the present. In a chaotic world, he simply made use of what he had. However, Roman understood his limits clearly. He was not yet strong enough to control every variable that might arise. Therefore, he continuously honed himself, both physically and mentally, to stand firm against all challenges. Though no one fully understood Roman's life or the enemies he faced, one thing was clear: the road ahead was fraught with dangers, and to survive, to protect what he believed in, he could not afford to stop. Amid the blazing forge, the young man with determined eyes uttered an unyielding vow. He refused to submit, refused to give up, no matter how great the adversity. The fire blazed fiercely, reflecting the burning determination within his chest. He took a deep breath, his breath merging with the heat spreading throughout his body. The flames surged violently as he employed his ultimate technique, divine fire, divine skill. The fire enveloped his body, transforming him into a living embodiment of willpower and empowerment. It was a secret technique from the fire demon, who once used fiery flames to absorb and accumulate demonic power in a short time. Now, that technique was revived in the hands of the successor. Although his current body had not fully adapted to the divine fire, divine skill, he still chose it, because it was the only option to overcome the challenge ahead. He knew very well, using this technique repeatedly would ravage his body from within. Lungs, internal organs, all could be burned, but that danger could not stop him. At this very moment, with eyes blazing with determination, he desired only one thing: power enough to crush every obstacle in his path. The story returns to reality, where sunlight floods a magnificent mansion. A quiet atmosphere prevails, but beneath it lie surging undercurrents. In the great hall, a blonde young woman spoke gravely. The undeniable truth: they were cornered with no way out. With cold eyes, she continued, analyzing the current situation. All connections had been severed, and the power gap was increasingly evident. A great storm was approaching. In the tense atmosphere of the meeting, she stood before the council table, frankly stating that some members might lean toward surrendering to preserve Lawrence's territory. However, her determined eyes and resolute voice immediately dismissed that opinion, affirming that surrender was never the right path. The atmosphere in the room instantly changed when one of the nobles slammed his hand on the table, the resounding sound expressing clear dissatisfaction with the opposing view. The elderly noble with blonde hair and a thick mustache spoke up to rebut, arguing that to avoid unnecessary bloodshed and save the soldiers' lives, surrender was the most reasonable choice. But the truth was revealed when she disclosed that the Barco family had exploited their relationship with the central government to borrow a huge sum from the Golden Bank. That revelation caused the entire hall to stir. The nobles around the table began whispering as they realized that the loan was granted without collateral. She continued to explain clearly. A loan without secured assets meant enormous interest rates, a dangerous financial trap weighing heavily on Barco's shoulders. Her eyes turned cold as she pointed out that Barco's goal was not merely economic gain. They were not waging war for money alone, but harbored a more sinister conspiracy. The brilliant symbol of the Golden Bank appeared as evidence for the accusation. For both parties in the loan to profit, Lawrence would surely become the sacrificial pawn. Her conclusion rang out gloomily. After victory, Barco and the forces behind him would stop at nothing to exploit and drain the land's resources. Lawrence would be torn apart if they lost it to the enemy. As the meeting's tension rose, an older gentleman with a serious expression interrupted the discussion, fixing his gaze on Flora and asking directly, "So what do you propose we do?" A question placing all hopes and responsibility on the young woman leading the room. Unfazed by doubt, Flora raised her head high, her eyes firm and voice decisive, declaring, "We have only one choice." Her words echoed like an unavoidable fate. Continuing with unwavering certainty, Flora affirmed, "It is the only way for us to survive this conflict." The gravity in her voice plunged the entire room into heavy silence. A hand slammed hard on the table in a surge of emotion. The nobleman clenched his fist, gritted his teeth, and spoke each word with force. "Resist!" His face revealed a mix of confusion and anger. At that moment, he fell silent. Under the dim light of the room, he pondered deeply, facing the uncertain future ahead. His expression seemed torn between duty, reason, and personal feelings. He silently thought, eyes fixed on Flora standing resolutely at the end of the table. I had placed great hopes in what she said. Each word weighed heavily in his heart, revealing a quietly rising disappointment. With faith in Flora's intelligence and sharp analytical skills, he had expected a breakthrough strategy, a plan that could turn the tide. But that hope was shaking with each passing minute. Finally, he sighed quietly, bitterly admitting inwardly, "But in the end, there is nothing new." That statement felt like a verdict on all remaining hope within him. Another voice spoke up with a tone of discontent and worry. "So you mean the best option is simply to lock our gates tight?" That question seemed to represent everyone's shared doubt. Flora did not evade, still standing tall and responding firmly. "I am not saying we just stand still and defend." In her eyes shone a spark of a greater plan about to be revealed. On the brink of an unprecedented strategy, Flora stood before the council and announced a shocking decision. All the fields planted this year would be abandoned and then burned. This extreme action was not meant to destroy, but to preserve, to prevent the enemy from exploiting the resources. After that declaration, the survival plan was implemented with meticulous preparations. Food was stockpiled throughout the village. Every can of preserved food, every sack of grain was part of the resilience Flora believed in, fighting with endurance, not just swords and spears. Everything was prepared for a single goal, to hold out until winter arrived. When snow covered the mountain slopes and the cold sealed every path, that would be the moment their opponent, Barco, would be trapped. Before that plan, a noble in the council could not hide his surprise. "Only until winter?" he asked, half doubtful, half challenging, unable to believe victory could come from waiting for the cold. Flora, with a determined gaze and calm words, explained that although Barco could borrow a large sum thanks to central government influence, that was their ultimate limit. The longer it dragged on, the loan became an unbearable burden. Her eyes revealed unwavering determination. In Flora's view, this battle was not only a clash of arms, but also a persistent fight between calculation and time. The influence of the Golden Bank was not to be underestimated. Their symbol spread across the continent like invisible threads binding the fate of countless lands. However, that very spread was a weakness if the debt became too large to control. Flora continued analyzing. If Barco could not quickly end the war, time would turn against them. The ever-increasing interest rates would become a double-edged sword, from an initial advantage to a terrible burden. A general in the council began to realize the truth in Flora's words. Although Barco had ties to the central government, that did not mean they could manipulate the Golden Bank. Political connections could not bribe financial pressure. And then war revealed its pragmatic nature. Flora pointed out, mercenaries were loyal only to money, and that money came from the Golden Bank loan. When funds ran out, loyalty would vanish as well. Flora continued outlining the strategy with steady eyes, emphasizing that when winter came and harsh conditions made it difficult for the enemy to deploy forces effectively, that would be the best opportunity for her side to gain the upper hand. She concluded her analysis with a cold but realistic statement. Unprepared enemies would suffer consequences. They would freeze to death in the harsh winter cold, with no other choice. That sharp declaration left the Count speechless, his eyes wide open, unable to hide his astonishment at the profound and unexpectedly decisive vision from his own daughter. Immediately, the meeting room erupted in murmurs. Nobles whispered in agreement, others expressed surprised admiration. The truth Flora had just revealed awakened their vigilance. This was not just a military battle, but a race against time. Amid the wave of discussion, the Count remained silent, staring ahead. Behind him, whispers still echoed, a testament to the irreversible change beginning. Recalling what had happened with Dmitri, the Count once thought his daughter was just an impulsive child, not mature enough to bear great responsibilities in the family and state affairs. But now, looking at Flora before him with calm demeanor and resolute eyes, he could not help but wonder, since when had that little girl grown into such a strong and reliable woman? Suddenly, the Count slammed his hand on the table, drawing all eyes in the meeting room to him. That decisive action signaled a change in the leader's stance. With a firm and resolute voice, the Count declared before the entire assembly that he fully agreed with Flora. From this moment on, the entire territory would begin preparing for resistance, not just to defend land, but to fight for survival. The final words rang out like a steadfast vow from the council. "We will be resilient." In the sunlight streaming through the window, faith in the new strategy began to ignite in every heart. With determined eyes and a calm voice, the head of the Lawrence family affirmed their undying resolve. Though cornered, they would not let the family name fade away. Flora, carrying a deep pain in her heart, pledged that whether the fortress fell or life neared its end, the Lawrence family would remain resilient until the very last moment. The young woman was unshaken by the looming danger. Flora's serious gaze was proof of a will not easily broken. Elsewhere, Roman, the young blacksmith, stood silently before the recently extinguished furnace. In the dying embers, his eyes reflected contemplation, as if listening to echoes from fate. The smoky forge was still warm, steam rising from the newly forged sword. Roman, silent amid the blazing heat, faced a moment that would shape his future. Under the clear blue sky, the simple wooden house, where great hopes were kept, stood quietly amidst nature. It was the starting point for Roman's new journey. The door opened, and Roman stepped forward with the first sword of his life. Though simple, that moment was sacred to him like a rite of passage. Raising the sword toward the sky, Roman caught the light reflecting off the steel blade. It was his first sword, a symbol of beginning and unshakable determination. Roman gazed at the blade as if it reflected his own self. The sword was not just a weapon, it was a mirror of who he was in the present, steadfast, strong, and full of aspiration. Holding the golden glimmering sword high, Roman solemnly named it after the world he lived in. It was his oath to use his own strength to carve an indelible mark in history. His burning eyes reflected unwavering faith as Roman whispered the name of his first sword, Salamander. The name symbolized not only the fire he had forged, but also the immortal soul ready to overcome all challenges, like the legendary creature living in flames. Each step echoed across the empty dirt yard, firm and full of determination. In the faint light of dawn, an unidentified figure slowly approached, leaving footprints like silent declarations for a momentous event about to unfold. A loud noise rang out as the massive city gate opened before him, like the tolling bell of war. The clear blue sky was torn apart by fierce gusts, causing trees and flags to flutter wildly. Amidst this majestic scene, the messenger walked on unflinchingly, carrying an unspoken challenge. The blue cloak embroidered with the family crest fluttered in the wind, revealing the emblem of a crown, crossed swords, and a white stag, the symbol of the Barco family. Standing tall and striding decisively, this messenger carried not just words but the spirit of a declaration of war. The Lawrence city guards shuddered slightly. The footsteps and aura from the opponent cast a heavy atmosphere. Though clad in iron armor, they could not hide the anxiety in their eyes, as their instincts warned that a great storm was approaching. The middle-aged man smiled slyly, his face showing clear smugness. He was not merely a messenger. He came with the purpose of imposing authority, wielding the prestige of Viscount Barco as a weapon to suppress the opponent's spirit from the very first words. Under the name of representing Viscount Barco, he stepped forward and loudly declared 3 options for the Lawrence side. The leather scroll was dramatically unrolled, accompanied by the first command: open the city gates, step outside, and surrender. The words from the messenger echoed among the Barco soldiers, making the surrounding atmosphere heavy. He emphasized that only surrender would guarantee everyone's lives, causing the soldiers to start murmuring anxiously about the situation ahead. At that moment, from the city wall, a Lawrence soldier stood up to counterattack, boldly declaring the second option: direct combat. He stressed that everything would be conducted under the public witness of the central government, implying that honor would be lost if they did not face it openly and honorably. From above, the gaze of a Lawrence leader looked down at the messenger. He responded, affirming that a battle was entirely possible if they were pushed to the brink. The firmness and calmness in his voice made the opponent unable to underestimate him. The messenger folded the scroll, feigning concession, but his tone remained full of pressure. He declared that any form of combat chosen by Lawrence would be accepted, and that Barco was ready to respect that decision. It was a political move disguised under the guise of fairness. The commander of the Lawrence army looked up at the blue sky, his face tense with complex emotions. He knew well that the declarations ahead would not simply be a response, but the fate of the entire Lawrence land. With a calm yet resolute voice, he tilted his head, his thoughtful eyes reflecting the night sky, then voiced deep doubts about the legitimacy of the accusations made by Barco. The sound of metal footsteps echoed through the hall as he stepped forward, continuing to expose the conspiracy behind the war. The documents cited by Barco were nothing more than forged papers, fabricating false blood debts between the two families. Ending his accusation, he suddenly raised his voice. The sound reverberated throughout the room like thunder. He decisively declared that he would never trade the lives of Lawrence's people for fake honor and others' conspiracies. While the atmosphere remained tense, he immediately ordered Barco's messenger to return. The stern words were conveyed: under any circumstances, Lawrence would not submit. Just as the declaration had not yet ended, he interrupted with a powerful shout of third option, continuing to expose the final choice that Barco deliberately disguised as a concession, but in reality was an insult to noble honor. The one standing on the city wall decisively added, if Lawrence accepted abandoning noble honor, they would have no choice but to hold the city and prepare to shed blood to survive. There was no retreat for honor. The Barco messenger walked calmly, as if everything was within his plan. His voice sounded artificial, affirming that Barco respected all decisions of Lawrence, as if yielding the choice but actually shifting the responsibility. But behind that composed facade was a cold warning. The Barco messenger looked straight at the fortress and declared that Lawrence would pay for every drop of blood spilled, evoking the prospect of a fierce war ahead. On the city wall, Lawrence's soldiers were stunned upon hearing the blatant threat. They breathed heavily, sweat pouring in the tense atmosphere. Nearby, Flora's gaze grew colder, the look of one bearing the honor of an entire family. From above, a formidable army of House Barco stretched out like a steel wall, arranged in neat battle formations. Facing this overwhelming sight, the lone messenger turned his back and walked away, as a sign that war was not about to begin but had long silently erupted. A loud command rang out from Lawrence's city, followed immediately by archers springing into action. The strings of bows hissed with deadly intent, arrows shot like rain, officially marking the first toll of an uncompromising war. The order, advance, was shouted loudly, resonating with the clashing of metal, creating a fierce battle sound. The Lawrence warriors had no choice but to give their all and charge forward, shouting no retreat with determination. Shouts echoed across the battlefield as Barco soldiers began surging onto the city walls. Ladders were rapidly raised, their momentum like a raging wave, determined to break down Lawrence's last defensive line. The battle quickly descended into chaos. A helmet was knocked off, hitting the ground with a harsh sound, a testament to the brutality of the conflict. Angry shouts of "damn it" expressed frustration at unexpected developments. In a fit of rage, a Barco commander gritted his teeth and shouted in choking fury, "Damn insolent scum!" He panted heavily and clenched his fists, unable to accept that a plan once thought perfect was being fiercely resisted by the enemy. Barco's overwhelming force, 3 times Lawrence's numbers, was once considered an undeniable advantage. Yet, before the still-standing city gate, their initial confidence began to waver. All strategies seemed to be losing effectiveness. A young Barco general, in a moment of reflection, admitted that he had once been certain this battle would end within an hour. But clearly, what was unfolding was a completely different development from his original expectation. The strategic map showed a clear disparity in forces, with Barco dominating Lawrence. But what made the entire situation worrying was that the flow of battle was turning in an entirely unforeseen direction. On the rain-soaked ground, a helmet lay abandoned as a vivid testament to defeat and casualties. What Barco had thought would be an easy victory had now become a grueling battle more intense than anyone among them had dared imagine. Facing Lawrence's stubborn resistance, one of Barco's generals bowed his head in a worried report, admitting that the opponent had prepared beyond expectations. His tense expression clearly reflected surprise at a force they had once underestimated. Meanwhile, at the front line, deep moats were firmly dug around the city, preventing Barco soldiers from approaching. This defensive tactic was simple but effective, like a solid barrier between two worlds. The battlefield became thick with arrows. A dense rain of arrows was fired from the very first minutes, like a preemptive strike that left the invading force breathless. Clenching his fist, the Barco commander gritted his teeth in anger. He had to admit that Lawrence had stockpiled a large amount of combat supplies, proving they were not only defending, but also ready for a prolonged confrontation. On the map table, the pieces representing the battle formation were rearranged. In the commander's mind, the repeated question was, how did Lawrence manage to prepare so thoroughly in just 1 week? Although they had imagined Lawrence would quickly surrender to keep the small remaining land, reality was completely different. The once perceived weak prey had now become a wall of bronze and iron. They had closed the city gates, accepting the risk of annihilating their entire lineage. The question echoing in the Barco commander's mind was not how to win, but where was the mistake? In the command room, a young soldier nervously spoke up. "What should we do now, sir?" The cold light shining through the window did nothing to ease the tension building in the air. Without hesitation, the seasoned commander curled his lips, his eyes sharp and cold. With a decisive voice, he ordered the deployment of a backup plan, a secret move only referred to by a cryptic name. "Prepare that immediately." Hearing this order, the young soldier flinched slightly. Though unclear about the next plan, he nodded quietly, his voice mixed with fear and duty. "Yes, sir." With a smug smile clearly on his face, the leader of Barco silently affirmed that Viscount Lawrence was nothing to fear. His blind faith in military strength made him underestimate the opponent before the situation was clear. He continued to indulge in reckless thoughts, believing House Lawrence would soon collapse under Barco's immense pressure, just like when the Viscount once yielded, trying to marry off his daughter to cling to fragile power. Memories of Lawrence's desperate past efforts flooded back, the act of betraying family honor by giving his daughter to House Dimitri. To Barco, this only proved one thing: the weak must ultimately submit. In his eyes, Lawrence was a house that never dared to confront adversity. In moments of peril, that Viscount, he believed, would again tremble and shrink away, seeking escape rather than fighting to the end. While Barco sank deeper into overconfidence on Lawrence's city wall, soldiers maintained high vigilance. The shout, "Move quickly," echoed as a warning that the battle was far from over. A general leading a Lawrence unit loudly instructed soldiers to always be ready, as no one knew when Barco would counterattack. The troops obeyed strictly, and an urgent atmosphere enveloped the entire front line. Amidst the wind carrying gunpowder dust and faint hope, a red-haired man, likely an experienced old knight, softly called Flora's name and gently admitted that she was right. He slowly walked toward the city wall where Barco's troops had just retreated. Reflecting on everything, he could not help but admire Flora's decisiveness. It was her resolute choice that caused the enemy to falter and withdraw. Flora, now strong and steady, frankly stated that she no longer relied on luck or others to solve problems for her. Every word she spoke clearly showed maturity and decisiveness in her leadership thinking. With determined eyes, Flora declared her new life philosophy, that she must be strong and face all challenges. Every sentence was a vow, marking her transformation from a young lady with a predetermined fate into a warrior bearing the heavy responsibility of protecting her family. Flora trembled slightly when she heard her father call her name, his voice filled with unspoken remorse. Tears welled up, but her gaze remained steady, no longer the fragile young lady she once was. Standing before his daughter, the father bowed his head in admission of fault. He apologized for forcing Flora to marry into the Dimitri family, a survival tactic, not an act of love. His voice was full of regret, his eyes averted, as if unable to face the past. He hesitated, then continued, but now a glimmer of hope shone within him as he witnessed Flora's growing maturity and courage. It was the moment he began to see his daughter with new eyes. He raised his head, his voice firm and confident. No matter what happened, he believed Flora would always make the right choice. No longer a domineering father, he was now ready to trust her decisions. Flora smiled gently, her blue eyes shining with peace. She called out "Father," in a voice both emotional and strong. The bond between them, once seemingly broken, was now healed by trust and understanding. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind swept by, a whoosh tearing through the air near Flora's ear. Her eyes widened in surprise. Something unusual was happening. A terrible explosion thundered, flames engulfing the entire courtyard. Flora and her father immediately reacted, quickly dodging as the blast spread toward them. What had just been fired was no ordinary weapon. The sturdy city wall shook violently, stones breaking apart and falling. Smoke and ash rose thickly, obscuring vision. The Lawrence defense system was under serious threat. Flora rushed up the city wall, heart pounding wildly. Seeing the breached wall, she could not hide her horror. "They've broken through the fortifications." She realized the ferocity of this battle had exceeded all expectations. Outside the city wall, a massive mechanism glowed with a strange matrix surrounding it, like an ancient ritual. A new weapon combining machinery and magic was in operation. Flora whispered, "Flare," but she knew this was something even more dangerous. As the red fire lit up the sky, Lawrence soldiers panicked upon realizing the terrible truth. Barco had prepared a flare, the ultimate magical weapon designed to destroy fortifications. Amidst pounding footsteps, terror spread faster than fire. Flora froze as the terrifying name echoed in her mind. Flare. She recalled records about this weapon, a magical catapult capable of crushing walls with a single strike. The harsh truth appeared in Flora's mind. The thing causing the walls to collapse was not steel, but powerful explosive magic concentrated in each flare projectile. Her eyes reflected confusion mixed with fear. Magical circles spun wildly in the air, and Flora silently calculated. Each flare shot cost tens of gold coins and could only be used with central government approval. Clearly, Barco was not alone in this war. Clenching her hands until they trembled, Flora could not believe that a lord like Barco could borrow such a large sum and wield enough influence to gain permission to use a national-level weapon. A new mystery was gradually unfolding behind the front lines. She tilted her head thoughtfully. There were only two ways to neutralize the flare: either confront it with an equivalent magical weapon, or open the city gates and risk everything to destroy it from outside. But Flora understood clearly, neither option was feasible. They had no comparable weapon and could not leave the walls without certain death. The battle was pushing House Lawrence to the brink. In the midst of her inner turmoil before she could decide, a call rang out. A maid rushed in, panic bringing sudden news. A magical telegram had just arrived from an unexpected sender. Flora opened her eyes wide, full of doubt. A telegram. At a moment when all seemed hopeless, the appearance of this message was like a piece of driftwood floating amid the raging waves. The message was quickly read aloud. Roman Dmitri sends word, I have a way to help you, reply to my message. In an instant, all eyes turned to Flora. A way out had just opened, but along with it came countless choices and consequences. Flora spun around upon hearing the name that made her heart freeze, a reaction both surprised and cautious. On her face, a fleeting expression of astonishment, her eyes wide with skepticism and hope. In the urgent scene as Lawrence's fortress wavered, the name Roman Dmitri suddenly appeared like a ray of light piercing through smoke and fire. The image of Roman Dmitri appeared clearly in Flora's mind, his calm violet eyes, confident smile carrying an unspoken promise. He was not an ordinary man in this chaotic world, but a symbol of power, strategy, and surprise. The message he sent through the telegram seemed to carry the very hope she was desperately seeking. Flora's eyes widened in astonishment upon hearing the unexpected news. Her mind was overwhelmed by the rapid developments, but what shocked her the most was the name mentioned, an offer from Roman Dmitri. In Flora's mind appeared the image of a man who was once the symbol of a powerful force. Roman Dmitri, with his sharp eyes and a smile hiding schemes, now expressing a desire to help Lawrence. Flora quickly stepped into the grand hall filled with magical light, where a holographic image of Roman appeared in midair. She tried to stay calm and asked directly about the heavy matter on her shoulders. How do you intend to help Lawrence? Roman did not beat around the bush. With determined eyes, he straightforwardly stated his intention to take revenge on House Barco, not for Lawrence, but for personal reasons he did not need to hide. He continued, revealing that this plan had been decided long ago. The only thing left was the right time to act, and if Lawrence agreed to cooperate, he was ready to accelerate the process for the benefit of both sides. Roman's final words left Flora motionless. He promised to help Lawrence immediately, to destroy Barco at this moment, only if they chose to join him in that private war. Flora raised her head, trying to hide her wavering emotions. She asked decisively, like a leader bearing great responsibility, "What do we need to do to help you complete that plan?" Roman answered briefly, his voice echoing through the communication magic as if delivering a fateful verdict. Very simple. He made the first demand. Lawrence must be the one to sacrifice first, paving the way for his revenge plan. That was the prerequisite for this alliance to begin. Flora turned her back, eyes facing the fiery night of the battlefield. The word sacrifice echoed in her mind, planting a heavy question. Could House Lawrence bear this price? Roman Dmitri suddenly raised his hand, interrupting, adding one final condition, a demand that could not be ignored. He clearly declared, to intervene, Lawrence must provide a legitimate reason. Meanwhile, the battlefield outside the city remained ablaze and chaotic. Roman Dmitri raised his hand, cutting off the conversation with a cold but decisive statement. He had one last condition for intervention. In the grim setting of war, the demand was revealed. Roman needed a sufficiently justified reason to join the fight, a justification that would make him beyond questioning. That reason was the breaking of an engagement. Roman was frank. He needed the pretext that he and Flora had ended their betrothal. Flora was stunned by that request. A series of questions rang in her mind. Why this? How could a personal event change the course of things? Roman did not keep her waiting long. He spoke the name Anthony Barco, a name carrying both personal hatred and a larger conspiracy. The demand was cruel. Flora had to accuse Anthony Barco of assaulting her. That would be the reason for Dmitri to officially step forward. Though knowing it was untrue, Roman emphasized, just lie. He understood the truth behind it, but what he needed was to legitimize his intervention scheme through her words. The price of sacrifice became clear. Flora would be despised by the nobility, lose her reputation as a perfect lady, and her name would forever be linked to a lie. But that very sacrifice was the only key to saving Lawrence from destruction. Roman looked at Flora coldly, interrupting her with one final demand. He did not need an ordinary excuse. He needed a reason strong enough to justify going to war. The image of the battlefield appeared in Roman's words, like a vivid illustration of the condition he set. He needed a reason to enter this war with legitimate standing. Roman did not hesitate. That reason had to be the broken engagement between him and Flora, a personal matter but one that could ignite the flames of war. To Flora's surprise, Roman began revealing the name behind the plan, Anthony Barco, with a serious expression. Without hesitation, Roman made a bold demand. Flora must accuse Anthony Barco of an unforgivable crime, a vile act enough to ignite the fury of the entire kingdom. although fully aware that nothing had happened. Roman coldly explained that just the accusation was enough to serve as a pretext for breaking the engagement and starting a war. He warned of the consequences. Flora could be ostracized by the noble society, her honor destroyed, all for a lie serving the greater cause. Roman bluntly emphasized, if she accepted sacrificing everything as a daughter of House Lawrence, she would save the entire family. That was the reason Roman needed, the only reason that allowed him to act under the name of justice in this war. Under Roman's pressure and cold proposal, Flora could only clench her fists in silence, her heart heavy with choices that had no way out. From the ashes and smoke of war, a mysterious shadow crept to the edge of the city wall. Sharp eyes beneath a hood observed the unsuspecting prey. Seizing the moment, the assassin leapt from his hiding place. A desperate scream echoed across the chaotic battlefield. "My lord, watch out!" The commander turned his head in a fateful moment, his startled gaze unable to comprehend what was happening before the deadly light closed in. A spear pierced through the bodyguard. The body was thrown back by tremendous force, blood mixing with the fiery red sunset in the sky. Flora froze. A flash of light behind her made her immediately turn around. The danger that had just struck her father had not yet subsided when an urgent command was about to leave her lips. Hearing her father's faint call, Flora slowly turned her head. Her eyes were resolute yet sorrowful, an important decision just forming in her mind. Flora straightforwardly gave the order, open the city gates, confront Barco head-on. In that moment, she was no longer a noble lady but an heir ready to bear the family's fate. Flora's words stunned the old general, opening the gates in such a crisis. But when she mentioned Roman Dimitri's promised support, a new hope seemed to ignite. Flora explained the bold strategy. If Lawrence's troops opened the gates and drew attention, Roman and his soldiers would attack from behind and destroy the dangerous weapon Barco possessed. Flare. Though still doubtful, her father had no time to question. Faced with Flora's determination and urgency, he understood that whatever the reason, his daughter was no longer the girl she once was, and now was the time to trust her. Flora raised her head, her determined eyes shining brightly as she declared absolute trust in Roman Dimitri, a man who kept his word and never broke promises. On the green grass below, a magical stone began to glow strangely. The sparkling magical runes on the wooden base signaled that a signal was being activated. Roman Dimitri appeared in the jungle, standing before the operating magic stone. The blue light reflected on his face, clearly showing that the decisive moment was approaching. Roman's purple eyes gleamed with vigilance and determination. He was calculating the next strategy, preparing to face danger. Beside Roman, a young knight urgently asked if they should attack immediately, but Roman, still with his back turned, decisively replied with one word, no. The knight worriedly warned, if delayed any longer, Lawrence could be completely destroyed. The delay would give the enemy a chance to press the fortress to collapse. He continued explaining. Flare was an extremely dangerous magical weapon capable of blowing up even fortress walls. To stop Barco's plan, they needed to act immediately. From their vantage point on the hill, they looked toward Lawrence's fortress burning in black smoke. The knight concluded, to break the enemy's rear, they had to leave immediately and attack from behind. However, Roman turned back, his cold eyes and voice sharp as a blade. And why should I care about that? The knight was stunned, unable to believe what he had just heard. Roman, without hesitation, bluntly replied that Lawrence's survival was not his priority. He had his own goal, one that was farther and colder. In the blazing red firelight, Flora's father uttered her name, his eyes hesitant mixed with worry. The brief silence felt endless before Flora's simple yet emotional response, a word she hadn't spoken in a long time. Father. Flora stood upright, her determined gaze fixed on the turbulent battlefield. Without hesitation, she declared a bold order. We must open the city gates and confront Barco directly. Stunned by his daughter's decision, the father could not hide his shock. He stammered a question, unable to believe his ears. Opening the gates now was tantamount to suicide. With a steady voice, Flora revealed, Roman Dimitri had promised to support them. This unexpected ally's backing opened a daring opportunity for House Lawrence's counterattack. Flora explained the plan. If they opened the gates and distracted the enemy with a frontal assault, Roman would lead troops to ambush Barco's rear and destroy the terrifying weapon called Flare. Flora's father still hesitated, questioning why Roman would risk helping them. But time did not allow for lengthy discussion. Flora answered briefly, emphasizing one certainty. Roman does not break his word. Flora affirmed with steel-bright eyes. Roman Dimitri was a man of his promises. For her, this was not only reassurance but also a spiritual pillar in this critical moment. In a forest far from the battlefield, a communication crystal glowed and trembled lightly. Flora's signal had arrived. Roman and his comrades were ready. Roman stood silently before the glowing crystal, his deep purple eyes piercing the air, a gaze both cold and resolute, signaling the storm about to break. Roman's assistant asked if they should attack immediately, but Roman decisively replied, no. No! His eyes never left the signal. He knew this battle required more than haste. It demanded ruthless calculation. Behind them, the fortress walls blazed fiercely. Amidst roaring cries, Lawrence's troops surged out of the gates, launching a daring counterattack amid the raging flames of war. Faced with Lawrence's sudden sortie, a mercenary sneered with contempt, openly mocking the weak whom he called scum daring to resist. With a savage grin, the mercenary swung his heavy war hammer in a killing frenzy, the bloody wind tracing deadly arcs across the battlefield. The heavy hammer rose in a brutal arc, tossing aside every enemy in its path, leaving behind only howling wind and spilled blood. Beneath blood-stained armor, his eyes gleamed with fury and delight. He fought not for ideals, but for the pleasure of unlimited slaughter. This mercenary was no ordinary man. He was a member of the Burge Mercenary Guild, notorious for cruelty and inhumanity, a nightmare on the battlefield. A Lawrence warrior was beheaded right before the city gate, blood spraying everywhere. The sight stunned the soldiers behind into utter terror. Amidst the blood and corpses, panic was clear in the eyes of each Lawrence soldier. The fear creeping in caused their formation to falter. Screams echoed across the battlefield. Fallen warriors begged for help, some gave up in despair. The bold had been reduced to chaos. On the city wall, Flora refused to be swept away by fear. She shouted orders for the soldiers to hold their ground until their last breath. Her voice was the anchor, the sole pillar holding together the shattering morale. Flora looked at the blazing battlefield, unease rising in her eyes. In her heart, she silently voiced her concern. If they could not lure the enemy troops to the right position, the entire defense plan would collapse. The stalemate tactic seemed to be reaching its limit. A deep worry surged in Flora's mind. If the opponent was not drawn as planned, Roman Dmitri would not be able to appear to turn the tide. At that very moment, the ground suddenly shook with a resounding boom, signaling the arrival of an unexpected force. The sound of galloping horses thundered, dust flying everywhere. From afar, a cavalry unit charged at breakneck speed, tearing through the deadly atmosphere around the camp. Chaos engulfed the Barco tents that had been relaxed under their overwhelming advantage. A leader from Barco's side turned his head toward the noise. His eyes narrowed suspiciously as he saw the horizon torn apart by horse shadows rushing like a storm. He blurted out, "What is that?" a question filled with doubt and ominous foreboding. From the dusty haze, Roman Dmitri appeared majestically on horseback, his red cloak billowing like fire and blood. His sharp eyes pierced through the enemy front line, carrying deadly intent and unshakable determination. His army charged forward like a whirlwind ready to sweep away all obstacles. In the silent dark night, the blue moonlight illuminated Flora's face, heavy with contemplation. The battle was approaching, but her plan to lure the enemy had yet to achieve the desired effect. Flora suppressed a sigh, her eyes following the battlefield. If the plan failed, she understood one thing clearly: Roman Dmitri, the last hope, would never appear. At that moment, the ground began to shake violently. The heavy sound of horse hooves echoed from afar like war drums, signaling that something unusual was approaching. From the horizon, a swirling dust cloud advanced. The cavalry charged like a storm toward the enemy camp, carrying overwhelming momentum and an unshakable determination. In the main camp of the Barco faction, a commander looked up, squinting into the distance. The sudden appearance made him exclaim in doubt, "What the hell is that?" In response to that confused gaze was the majestic figure of Roman Dmitri. Wearing a blazing red cloak, he led the cavalry, his eyes cold as ice but fierce like fire. Without hesitation, he gave the order to charge. The knights under his command knew that the moment to risk their lives had come, earlier than they had ever prepared for. On their war horses, each tightened their grip on their weapons. Despite the simmering anxiety within, they advanced because they fought under Roman's banner, the man who never accepted defeat. In their hearts was restlessness, undeniable unease, but also faith in their leader. Roman needed no many words, for his actions were the command itself. Under the blue sky, Roman loudly announced the strategic plan: to strike the Barco rear and destroy their most dangerous war machine, the weapon that had sown terror along the Lawrence front. The Barco commander stood watching the enemy camp, his eyes full of contempt. With a mocking expression, he sneered, believing the Lawrence forces had no hope due to their thin numbers, barely worth worrying about. Without hesitation, he ordered his soldiers to prepare for confrontation. The insults hurled at the enemy were full of disdain, as if speaking to mischievous children rather than a real army. The troops behind him echoed in unison, showing absolute confidence in victory. The battle signal was given. Thick shields were raised, sharp spears stood upright, forming a solid defensive wall. The Barco forces were ready to receive the first strike from what they considered a weak opponent. Roman Dmitri led the Lawrence cavalry, galloping across the battlefield. His red cloak fluttered behind him like a signal heralding the nightmare about to descend on Barco. He charged straight into the enemy's shield wall without hesitation. In the moment of combat, Roman raised his sword shining with golden light, ready to strike down. The strange glow from the purple aura rising from his weapon signaled the presence of a power beyond imagination, one that could not be stopped by ordinary shields and spears. With terrifying speed and force, Roman's strikes were like purple lightning bolts, breaking through the Barco defensive formation in an instant. Shields were split in two, soldiers were thrown aside, blood and screams mingled in an unstoppable deadly whirlwind. However, amid Roman's fury, a spear managed to pierce his warhorse. A painful neigh echoed as blood sprayed from the horse's body. The attack did not harm Roman but caused his assault rhythm to falter for a moment. Roman's powerful kick cracked the ground, generating enough force to launch his entire body into the air. The enemy soldiers' eyes could not react in time. They only saw the red cloak fluttering out of sight like a red lightning bolt shooting into the sky. Using the momentum from the kick, Roman darted through the enemy formation like a black arrow piercing through a storm. In the blink of an eye, he passed the spear-wielding soldiers who looked up in shock, only just realizing that death was descending from the sky. Like a slaughtering whirlwind, the downward slash was decisive, leaving a blood-red trail that stained the entire view. The enemy front line fell in panic, facing only the opening strike of the demon. Roman swept across the battlefield with icy eyes. The blood on his cheek did not make him blink. Instead, it highlighted the cold aura of a man ready to break all barriers to lead. In many people's memories, they once wondered, why would someone who had stood at the pinnacle of fame like the Saint Demon still choose the most dangerous position? But the answer never changed, neither in the past nor now. Because to break the enemy's fighting spirit, the strongest must stand at the forefront of the storm. The eyes of the Barco soldiers trembled when facing Roman. Each breath grew heavy, their bodies trembling before that overwhelming presence. Roman stood there, his sword radiating demonic energy swirling around, unmatched in momentum. In the tense silence like a drawn bowstring, his voice rang coldly. "If you dare not advance, I will come to you myself." That challenge was like a fire burning the pride of every soldier. One of them clenched his teeth, his eyes flashing determination, as if trying to dispel the fear that bound his body. "Charge for our leader!" the shout echoed across the battlefield. A young knight surged forward to lead, awakening courage in those still hesitating behind. In the distance, Flora's green eyes suddenly widened. A shiver ran down her spine, as if she had just witnessed a turning point that both the battle and House Lawrence's fate had been waiting for. The frontline cavalry who charged immediately were shocked by the horrific scene before them. Their eyes widened in panic, as if their instincts screamed a warning of an impending nightmare. As expected, the battlefield instantly turned into a bloody hell. Soldiers were torn from their saddles, blood splattered in the air, screams echoed like wails of lost souls amid the storm of death. Amid the chaos, a soldier who had not yet recovered was pierced through by a spear. The extreme pain twisted his face as he fell from his horse, blood staining the ground red. The brutal massacre drove another soldier into madness. His pupils contracted, veins stood out on his face in red lines. He clenched his fists tightly, his soul seemingly strangled by rising fear and rage. "I must," he muttered in despair, but before he could finish his vow, a sharp sword cut across his neck. Blood gushed like a fountain, life extinguished in an instant. From the chaos emerged another warrior, his eyes blazing red like a demon, delivering a terrible punch to an enemy's head. Blood splattered everywhere, skull shattered, the cracking sound ringing like a death knell. Those blazing red eyes widened further, not only from bloodlust, but as if driven by a power beyond control, a rage with no end. Not far away, Flora maintained her composure. She gripped her sword hilt tightly, surrounded by brilliant blue magical energy. "Just a little more," she told herself, her eyes shining like blue flames before the storm. Flora dashed forward like a blue lightning bolt, swinging her sword in rapid succession. Her strikes were not only sharp but carried divine power, sweeping away enemy ranks like withered leaves in a storm. On the other side, the enemy finally recognized the real threat. "We must stop that monster!" A shout rang out amidst the dense ranks as they simultaneously raised shields and pointed spears, forming a human wall facing the one ravaging the battlefield. Roman Dmitri, cloaked in deep red with a dark purple magical aura rising around him, swung his sword in a deadly strike, tearing through the enemy's front line in an instant. Roman's blazing purple eyes reflected cold focus as he identified his target, the magical device preparing to fire, a strike that would change the entire course of the battle. In the distance, a cylindrical magical weapon wrapped in a golden aura glowed intensely. Flare, the destructive mystical weapon Barco had kept hidden, now ready to unleash. Without waiting for the enemy to act first, Roman dashed into the defensive formation, cutting through ranks, causing the enemy lines to completely collapse like grass in a storm. Amidst the dust and blood, a soldier shouted in astonishment, pointing at the warrior slaughtering his ranks. "That's Roman Dmitri." He could hardly believe his eyes. Recalling before the battle, the reward for this mission was enormous, enough to make anyone eager to shed blood. But no one anticipated the price to be paid. The honor of the Burj mercenary gang was on the line. As leader, he drew his sword from its sheath, declaring he would personally deal with the threat before him. With extraordinary speed, Burj's figure tore through the air toward the battlefield like a blazing red arrow, determined to face Roman head-on. In a moment, the two master warriors confronted each other. The wind tore through the air, signaling the approaching clash between two powerful foes. Burj, a top-tier mercenary recognized by the kingdom, engaged Roman directly. Red and purple lights exploded at their clash point, ringing out with fierce steel-on-steel sounds. Clang! Unlike B-rank mercenaries who relied only on physical skill, A-rank warriors possessed the ability to wield aura, a high-level combat energy that gave them overwhelming superiority on the battlefield. Their two swords blazed and collided violently, symbolizing the confrontation of two classes. Burj, a formidable A-rank warrior, raised his flaming sword high. As a level 2 aura knight, he channeled all his strength into a full-power slash, charging at Roman with a roar like thunder crashing upon his enemy. Yet in that moment of confrontation, Roman's eyes did not blink once. He stood firm, a slight smirk on his lips as if this battle was just a dull warm-up. Burj's aura-infused sword began to vibrate violently, not from his own pressure, but because of the deep purple energy from Roman's sword overwhelming it, causing the entire weapon's soul to tremble. In a devastating clash, Roman's sword radiated brilliant purple light, shattering his opponent's blazing red aura. The shockwave spread wide, shaking the ground in an instant. Burj was stunned. His eyes widened as if unable to believe what was happening before him. "Impossible," he muttered. A lifetime as a skilled warrior, yet never had he seen anyone cut through his aura so easily. His mind began to shatter. "Cannot be this strong," the voice echoed in his head as relentless strikes from Roman battered him, staggering him with every second. Burj's face was now full of tension. He tried to brace against the fierce attacks, but the red light from his sword was just the last ember resisting the impending ruin. Only 5 seconds. That was all the time a level 2 aura warrior could withstand Roman Dmitri. As Burj collapsed, Roman calmly turned his back as if the encounter had never troubled him. Burj collapsed, blood staining the ground red. Roman walked decisively, leaving behind an eerily silent battlefield. Those 5 seconds were enough to prove, before absolute power, their rank title was meaningless. Horror engulfed the troops as they witnessed the unbelievable scene. Their undefeated captain had been defeated in the blink of an eye. Faces stunned, eyes trembling, no one dared to believe what had just happened was real. While most soldiers panicked, a few could not hide their admiration. In the flickering flames of the battlefield, they watched Roman Dmitri with reverent eyes, as if witnessing a living legend. From the rear, a Barco leader screamed madly, furious that the situation was out of control. He could not accept that an A-rank had been defeated so easily and immediately ordered Roman's execution at all costs. The guards acted immediately, protecting their master from the imminent danger. Though dragged away in panic, the nobleman struggled relentlessly, clutching tightly to his pride, crumbling bit by bit in his desperate eyes. Roman Dmitri silently observed the entire battle. Without excess emotion, he stood like a solitary mountain amid fire and wind, his sharp eyes scrutinizing every next move of the enemy. With a single word, Roman whispered like an activation ritual, "Flare!" It was not just the name of a weapon, but a declaration marking the start of a battle beyond this world's understanding. Before him, Flare began to activate. Ancient magical symbols spun, radiating bright golden light. Roman looked up at it, silently confirming this weapon was one of the powers Murim's land did not possess. Divine power surged from the earth into Roman's body, forming a swirling dark vortex around him. Amid the howling magical wind, his battle aura radiated heavily, as if dominating the very space. Roman raised his sword solemnly, as if preparing to perform an ancient ritual. He softly chanted the secret name. Divine Demon's Sword Technique, First Form. Dark purple light began to gather at the blade. The blade burst into flames of a sinister energy. Demonic aura surged like a living creature, growling around Roman. The magical symbols on Flare reacted as if about to unleash a world-ending attack. The sword stained with dark purple energy struck down midair, its power from Roman's skill terrifying nearby enemies, including the commander, into stunned silence. His face twisted in fear, utterly unable to believe the scene before him. Immediately after the fatal strike, Barco's giant war machine, the trump card in the siege, caught fire and was blasted into the air with a fierce explosion, as if the entire Barco prestige turned to ashes. Splintered wood scattered, dust swirling across the battlefield. Amid smoke and dust, Roman Dimitri's figure appeared magnificent, standing firm beside the ruins of the enemy's war weapon like a punishing god descending upon the chaotic field. At that moment, Roman raised his head high, his voice resonating across the battlefield. "Hear this, Lawrence," a declaration not only an order but a powerful rally affirming his own status. Sword held high, the light from the victory aura reflected with Roman's movement. He loudly proclaimed before the troops of both sides, "I, Roman Dimitri, have destroyed Barco's war machine." The declaration thundered across the sky. On the walls and throughout the Lawrence front, all soldiers and civilians cheered together, the cries of hurrah echoing like a tsunami, replacing former fear with blazing hope. Amid the smoke of war, Flora stood silently, tears streaming down her face. Overwhelmed with emotion, she could not speak, only raising her hand to cover her mouth while her heart trembled with both astonishment and gratitude. Her green eyes wide in the fiery red sunset, Flora choked back tears and whispered, "He really did it." It was not just a victory, but a vivid proof of the faith she had placed in Roman from the beginning, a faith now confirmed by a miracle. Amidst the ashes and smoke, Roman Dimitri stood tall amidst the battlefield's ruins. With a deep, steely voice, he declared the complete destruction of Flare, the strategic weapon that Barco's army had staked everything on. A swift counterattack shifted the battle in Lawrence's favor. Barco's forces, having lost their trump card, were forced to retreat helplessly. From behind, cries of hatred echoed, but Roman silently turned away, not bothering to look back. Amid the dusty battlefield, bloodstains on the armor testified to the fierce combat that had just taken place. A young knight stood motionless, breathing heavily, his eyes not yet calm after the storm. Chris, a knight close under Roman's command, was recalling the battle. Unlike the usual use of aura, he had harnessed that power in a completely different way, breaking free from the conventional path many followed. In his thirst for battle, Chris concentrated all his aura into a single point, a technique only masters dared to attempt. Though his body was exhausted, he still managed to reduce energy loss and maintain dominance until the very end. Though once mocked as a hopeless imitator, Chris remained steadfast on Roman's path, and it was in this bloody battle among countless enemy corpses that his growth clearly ignited. Looking back, Chris could not deny what everyone clearly saw, that he had improved. A confident smile spread across his lips, no longer the hesitant knight he once was. Chris raised his head high, his eyes shining brightly with conviction. In his heart there was no longer any doubt. Lord Roman's path is the right path. The sunlight shone down on the blood-stained armor, bearing witness to that choice. Suddenly, Chris was startled. A strange feeling pulled him out of his thoughts. His eyes widened in confusion as he remembered something important he had forgotten amidst the victorious spirit. Before him, armored warriors, his comrades, were kneeling down from exhaustion. Heavy breaths echoed in the air. Chris was shocked. "Ah, that's right." The battle was over, but its consequences were still evident on their bodies. Chris stood in the battlefield, watching his comrades collapse from exhaustion. Deep inside, he understood clearly. They had all given their all just to not be left behind the man named Roman Dimitri. Despite the fierce battle, Chris felt proud thinking that all 30 members of the team were still alive, none seriously injured. This proved Roman's leadership ability and strategic vision were undeniable. Seeing the soldiers panting and collapsing, Chris realized why Roman had chosen them. Though imperfect, they all shared an unyielding spirit and dedication to fight to the end. A young soldier gasped for breath, quietly glancing toward his commander. In his heart rang a clear truth: they all survived only because of one person. Amidst the blazing ruins, Roman walked like a ghost from another world. His presence caused the wind to cease and fear to linger in the eyes of those who were once enemies. An enemy soldier swallowed hard, unable to believe the scene unfolding before him. With just one man, the entire battle's outcome had been completely turned around. Roman stopped, his cold gaze fixed on his soldiers. He spoke briefly and decisively. They had completed their mission. Those simple words everyone understood. He was the one who brought victory. At Lawrence City, the suspension bridge began lowering with a heavy thud. This event signaled one thing: the victors had returned. Roman led the army across the bridge, each step echoing like war drums. Behind him, the silent warriors followed, bloodied but full of pride. As they entered the city, the sky's light shone directly on Roman. Despite the strong wind, no one could shake his stride, the man who redefined war by his own strength. As the gates of Lawrence City opened, the people rushed out to welcome Roman Dimitri as a hero. They shouted his name amidst the white snow, their eyes sparkling with gratitude. To them, the name Roman had now surpassed the title of a noble. He was the one who saved the land from destruction. The continuous applause echoed like a vow to forever remember this great achievement. But amid the countless cheers, a silent gaze filled with regret passed by. The woman standing in the shadows was not as joyful as the others. In her heart, admiration had turned into sorrow. The chance to connect, to walk alongside a legend like Roman, had slipped away from her and those who once underestimated him. The crowd of Lawrence's people erupted in cheers and praise as Roman Dmitri passed through the city gate. To them, he was no longer a distant noble but had become a hero, the one who turned the tide of the war. However, amid the applause, a sharp gaze appeared from Viscount Lawrence. In his heart, pride mingled with regret as he realized a golden opportunity had been missed. He recalled his first impression of Roman, a young man who radiated difference. Roman had once been underestimated, but now even he found it hard to believe the reality that this young man alone had destroyed Flair, Barco's ultimate weapon. Roman's image now appeared like a war god, exuding an overwhelming aura that made others wary. That power came not only from his sword, but also from the indomitable spirit he carried. In Viscount's thoughts, the Dmitri family had produced a fierce tiger. If not for past entanglements, if things had gone more smoothly, perhaps that young man would have become the son-in-law he once hoped for. Watching Roman from afar in a hallucination shaped like a white tiger cloaked in dark energy, the Viscount could only silently lament. That monster had surpassed his reach, and now he could only stand outside and admire. Shaking off his thoughts, the Viscount quickly regained his diplomatic composure and spoke warmly to Roman, the hero of Dmitri. Smiles and laughter arose as if to mask the lingering regrets yet to fade. Roman responded with a slight smile, just enough to show goodwill but not reveal his inner feelings. Two men, once adversaries and doubters of each other, now shook hands firmly under the congratulatory eyes of all. An official alliance had formed. Along the long sunlit corridor, footsteps echoed steadily. The peaceful atmosphere stood in stark contrast to the battlefield just ended outside. Roman Dmitri quietly stopped before a large door. His calm gaze revealed no emotion, but every movement radiated confident self-control. From behind, a hesitant voice sounded. A feminine figure, gentle yet resolute, slowly approached with a heart full of hesitation. It was Flora. The young Lord of Lawrence could no longer hide her emotion, bowing her head to offer a simple but sincere thanks to Roman. In Flora's words was self-reproach. She admitted failure in the plan to lure the enemy, and that it was Roman who stayed to fight instead of turning away like an outsider. Her voice was full of emotion. She wanted Roman to know she acknowledged everything, and that her gratitude was not only for survival, but also for faith reborn. Roman responded only with his usual indifference. He did not see his actions as noble, simply keeping the promise he once made to himself. He neither praised nor blamed. To Roman, the people of Lawrence had done enough and as he expected, and that was enough for him to fight to the end. Flora flinched slightly, but her eyes remained firm. Though she knew Roman expected nothing, she still wanted to repay that kindness with a promise of her own. Before the one who saved the entire territory, Flora affirmed, if Roman needed anything during the conference, Lawrence would not hesitate to provide. That was an honor she was ready to guarantee. Flora stood upright, her voice firm yet gentle, pledging to protect Roman's interests in the upcoming conference, and ensuring that his contributions would be duly rewarded. Roman smiled softly, a rare smile briefly reflecting a quiet pleasure at Flora's proactive offer. Maintaining his calm demeanor, Roman gently replied that he would not refuse if Lawrence sincerely wished to repay him, words seemingly simple, but filled with confidence and sharpness. He slowly turned, grasped the door latch, preparing to open the door leading to the important political meeting about to take place. Bright light poured in from the room ahead as the door opened. Roman turned to signal Flora, softly saying, "Now let us begin this meeting." The atmosphere in the conference room became lively with discussions echoing everywhere. The nobles of Lawrence and their allies had taken their places, beginning to exchange opinions about the recent war. While delegates proposed reconciliation and ending the war with Barco, Roman sat silently listening. His eyes were sharp as a blade, but he said nothing, only observing and evaluating every word spoken. Arguments continued to pour in. Barco still had enough forces to counterattack, so it was unwise to risk creating new conflicts. Most tones leaned toward safety and compromise. Flora and her father sat at the head of the table, delivering the conclusion. It was time to put the past aside and seek peace, seemingly wishing to close this bloody chapter in Lawrence's history. Yet inwardly, Roman pondered. The people of Lawrence were merely meek grazers, living off the kindness of others. They could easily be swallowed if they did not change. While everyone at the conference was still discussing sending envoys, Roman suddenly asked permission to speak. His voice was deep but resolute, causing the room's atmosphere to halt. Silence enveloped the conference. All eyes turned to Roman, including surprise, suspicion, and anticipation. The girl standing beside her father also held her breath unconsciously. After a moment of hesitation, the old lord nodded in agreement. Roman gently thanked him, then placed his hand on the table, preparing for the heavy words he was about to speak. Roman stood upright, affirming the current situation. Barco was under immense financial pressure. Each of his words cut through the fragile hope of those wishing for peace like a blade. He paced slowly around the conference table, analyzing that Barco had incurred a massive debt and now could not turn back. To survive, they were forced to destroy Lawrence. Roman concluded that all of Barco's calculations had not changed, even though their secret weapon had been destroyed. Though Flair was gone, the danger was far from over. With a cold voice and emotionless eyes, Roman made a terrifying prediction. If Lawrence sent envoys to seek peace, all they would receive in return would be a headless corpse. That prophecy caused the knights around the table to pale. Some merely cleared their throats quietly to hide their worry, while others fell completely silent, swallowing the rising unease. The atmosphere grew extremely tense. Those who had been silent now began to frown and clench their fists. They knew Roman did not speak lightly. Barco was truly a threat not to be underestimated. One of Lawrence's leaders spoke up, trying to argue but unable to hide the tremor in his voice. He mentioned the bodies being moved outside as undeniable proof of unforgettable losses. He concluded Barco could not be forgiven, and Lawrence must take revenge. Roman Dmitri spoke with a sharp gaze fixed on the members in the meeting room. His voice was powerful, affirming that Lawrence not only needed to retaliate against Barco, but also turn them into a lesson for the entire world. Despite Roman's decisive words, Viscount Lawrence bowed helplessly, admitting the bitter truth. They all understood what needed to be done, but the power in their hands was too small to change the situation. Roman remained unshaken by that pessimism. He turned around, his back straight, and spoke decisively, a strong rebuttal that there was still a way to turn the tide. Under the intense gaze of everyone, Roman stepped closer to the Viscount, his eyes flashing with a wild light. He revealed there was something the Viscount could absolutely do. Roman's overwhelming presence made the atmosphere in the room tense and suffocating. Those words made the Viscount pale, his eyes wide with shock. He was completely taken aback by the implication in Roman's words and actions, as if facing a wild beast in human form. At that very moment, a scream rang out from outside the camp. Along with it came the heavy sound of a body hitting the ground, a sign that events were suddenly shifting violently. Elsewhere, inside a tent, a man angrily slammed both hands on the table. He shouted Roman Dmitri's name, furious at having his carefully laid plan interrupted, seeing it as a blatant provocation. Amid heavy breathing, he admitted that the current situation was unfavorable to them. However, in the tension, he asserted there was still one last way to turn the situation around and regain the initiative. He proposed an unexpected solution, organizing a duelist tourney, an honorable duel. That declaration made Roman Dmitri's eyes flash, and everyone around was stunned. According to the kingdom's law, the duelist tourney was a battle between 3 warriors representing each house, held under the supervision of referees appointed by the central government. It was a sacred fight, and all results were binding, a survival opportunity for both sides.